Hi everybody, this is the video for Unit 6. We're going to talk about job applications and doing interviews and also internships and volunteering. Okay, a lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward, things you may very well know, but I think it's worth repeating these things in this moment when you're really focused on thinking about completing job applications, hopefully going to interviews, all of those kinds of things, okay? So some of this is pretty basic, but again, make sure you're sort of on point in terms of thinking through all the ways in which it will really help you to prepare for the job application process, okay? All right, we've already talked about, for example, your resume and cover letter or statement of purpose if you're going in that direction. So I think you have a sense of those documents. Some jobs will ask you to submit several things, right? Some will just ask for a resume and cover letter. That's again pretty straightforward. Some will ask you for some other things. Some kinds of jobs may want to see a writing sample, for example, or some other kind of statement. So my advice here is make sure you clearly read what the position ad says, what they ask you to submit, and submit exactly that, right? So don't leave anything out, but also don't add unsolicited materials, okay? Don't send, a paper you wrote just as a matter of, like, FYI, right? Only send those things if you've been requested to do so, okay? Send exactly what you've been asked to send. Interviews are, of course, a primary goal of any sort of application that you submit or resume that you submit, where you'll actually get to have some face-to-face time with folks from that organization. Interviews are something that you can really prepare for quite a bit, and preparing will put you in a position to do much better than if you just kind of walk in there cold. So I strongly encourage you to prepare very specifically for any interviews that you're invited to, okay? So here's some of the things I encourage you to do. And again, this is in the context of when you're doing a job search, you may very well send out tons of different resumes to tons of different companies and organizations, which is great, right? You won't get an interview with all of those. The ones that you do get an interview with, then do a deeper dive into what that company or organization is like, okay? You want to be very specific about knowing who you are actually going to be speaking to, all right? So that means go research that employer or the job before you get to that interview, okay? You also want to, again, do all the sort of basic things that show that you're interested and that you're professional. Get there early. Make sure, again, you've prepared. You have your materials. You know what your materials say. So if they ask you a question, you can immediately respond or elaborate. You also want to prepare actual answers to common interview questions, and I'll show you some of those in a minute. The other main piece of advice I'll give is it's very common for interviewers to ask you if you have any questions or if you want to know something else. Always come also prepared with things you want to know about that company or organization or job, okay? So you, again, want to show that you've done your homework, you want to show that you're interested, etc. Okay. So in terms of researching the organization, you've been invited to an interview, you roughly know who these folks are because you applied, but you want to look on their website or anywhere else to find more about them. What does that company or organization do? What kind of services do they provide or products do they create? What is their mission and goals? Many organizations will list or write out their mission and their goals on their website. Read those and make sure you're familiar with those. How big is this organization, right? How many employees does it have? How many locations is it in? What are some of the things it's working on right now, if you can find that from the website? Any and all of that information will put you in a much better position to, for example, ask intelligent questions about them when it comes to that point of the interview. You also want to do as much research on the specific job as you can, right? We've already talked about and you've already looked at some job ads that often are quite detailed. They say, like, you'll be doing these exact things, you need to be able to do these exact things, etc. So definitely remind yourself of what they put into their job ad. And again, if you can, go on their website and see, are there other people in that or other similar positions? You can see sort of who they are and what they're doing. So again, as much as you can figure out in advance about what you're going to do, the better you can prepare yourself to show that you're a really good candidate for that job, right? So you want to know, see if you can figure out sort of, what are the expectations, responsibilities, skills, preferred qualities that they're looking for in that candidate, and be prepared to demonstrate that you have and know all those things. And then, anything else that you can sort of add that you think is relevant to the position. So again, as we've talked about for resumes, you want the way you engage during an interview to be really tailored to that specific position, right? So it's not just a sort of generic set of answers. It's answers that are really about your understanding of that job and the fact that you want to show that you're really good at potentially doing that job, right? So that's the goal. You can also, you should have some sense of sort of what's the salary being offered, what's the benefits, etc. Sometimes it's easier to find that information, sometimes it's harder, right? But knowing something about sort of what the compensation, etc. is, so again, you kind of know what you're interviewing for, you have a sense of that. Okay, common interview questions. Lots of companies and organizations basically recycle the same or similar questions. It's unusual to have somebody ask you a completely different question than anything you've ever heard before, which is good because it means you can really prepare and anticipate the kinds of things you're going to be asked. Now, when I say prepare your answers, I'm not suggesting that you memorize an answer. You don't want it to sound super canned, right, or stiff, but I also don't think it's a good idea to go in there and just try to speak off the cuff. The reason for that is even if you think you could come up with a pretty good answer on the spot, in the context of the interview, it's harder to do that. You'll be nervous. You're going to be speaking to people you don't know very well. All of those things can make it harder kind of to come up with something and to formulate something. You want to give your best possible answer to the questions in an interview, so it behooves you to think through what are the main points I want to make when I'm asked this question and have them sort of in the back of your mind, right? You can even think of them as bullets. Like when I get to this question, there's sort of 3 things I want to highlight, right? So what are those questions? These are sort of pretty common interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Why do you want to work here? What sorts of skills do you have that match our needs? How would you describe your work ethic? What are your greatest strengths and weaknesses? Always a hard one. At least the weaknesses part, right? Tell me about a challenge or conflict you faced and how you dealt with it. Tell me about a time you took a leadership role. Why should we hire you? And then do you have any questions for me, right? The interviewer asking you that. Like I said earlier, always have questions. You should never, when you're asked, do you have any questions for us? You should never say, no, I'm good, right? Always have things you want to ask. In terms of these other questions, as you may note, any of these, if you think through them, you can come up with a fabulous answer. These are not sort of tricky or difficult questions. In a lot of ways, they're kind of softballs, right? In the sense that they are, with these questions, giving you an opportunity to really highlight what's great about you as a candidate for the job, right? They're sort of teeing you up to be able to really talk about yourself in a way that will put you in a good light. So take that opportunity to use these questions as a sort of avenue to present yourself in the way you want to appear to your potential employer. So again, that means preparing, not memorizing, but preparing, meaning having already in the back of your mind how you'd like to respond to these questions. Okay. At the bottom of this slide, I put a link. I'm not going to show this now. It's less than 10 minutes, but it's just a video that shows sort of an interviewee or an interviewer asking some of these basic questions and an interviewee, a student, responding and giving some sort of feedback and advice about best ways to answer these common questions. So I think especially if you are planning on being on the job market or you're already on the job market and of course then hoping that you'll be going to interviews in the very near future, I encourage you definitely to watch that video just as another nation that those interviews. Okay, so the final point I want to touch on is internships and volunteering. As we've already discussed, when you're in the beginning of your career, you're still building your resume. You may not yet have the job work experience that you need to get that next job, right? So one way to really get experience when you're still sort of early on is to sign up for internships or volunteer positions, right? Those are positions that you don't need experience to get into, but they will give you some of that experience that will work towards what you want to do in the future. So I just wanted to throw out a few examples of some places where one can find internships or volunteer experiences that can be quite valuable, both in terms of what you learn and in using them as sort of a credential on your resume to show who you are and what you know how to do. Okay. So the first one is very well known, which is Peace Corps, which is a much more sort of intensive kind of volunteer work, right? It's a 2-year commitment. You'll be placed overseas, but it's also something that a lot of people who do it say is really transforming of their lives. We happen to have a Peace Corps prep program here at Northeastern. So if you are interested in thinking about doing the Peace Corps, you can look for that on the Northeastern website, or please feel free to email me and I can connect you directly with the person who runs the Peace Corps prep program. So that's a sort of, again, a bigger commitment, but something that, again, depending on what you want to do, can be an incredible experience and very valuable. Lots of students also want to do something that gives them some opportunities to go abroad, but maybe not with quite the commitment of something like the Peace Corps. There's lots of opportunities for teaching English abroad. Again, you don't need much more than your language skills to get those positions, but they give you, again, that opportunity to travel and live in other places. So I've given you an example of one organization that facilitates that kind of experience. The third link is just the city of Chicago has some volunteer and internship programs. You can check there. Some of them are, with parts of the city, but those are another great kind of way to get your foot in the door. And then finally, always check out Handshake, which is a sort of internship and job site that is available through Northeastern that you can access just by virtue of being a student. I'm sure you've already looked at it. I put the link there if you want to use it. And again, there's just lots of stuff in there, and Handshake is really especially geared towards students. So in other words, they know that you're still in school, that you're still learning, and they're looking for folks, exactly with your level of experience who can fill certain kinds of positions. So, again, you don't have to do this instead of pursuing work, but you can do it alongside looking for work. Right? I think these things really go hand in hand. So in addition to this video, I'm going to include this PowerPoint also in D2L so that you can be sure to go back and use these links if they're useful to you. So I hope that helps, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye. So while you're working your way